Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for attending our symposium in memory of Yehiel Ben-Zvi. I hope you will find it both interesting and instructive. I ask you to forgive me for opening this event with an alarm, a climate alarm, or to quote UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres following the recent UN report on climate change, code red for human-driven global heating, with little time remaining for reversal. Indeed, we live in times of rapid change, climate change, day after day. With growing apprehension, we watch its disastrous consequences as extreme weather events ravage our planet. In 2021 alone, some of the most devastating hurricanes on record raged through Louisiana and Mississippi, the Fiji Islands and Indonesia, killing hundreds and leaving thousands destitute. Vast flooding caused by incessant downpours destroyed entire villages in Western Germany. Unprecedented wildfires swept through Australia, Greece, Turkey, and Italy. Madrid saw its heaviest snowfall in 50 years. A colossal dust storm darkened the skies of Beijing, and even the cherry blossoms in Kyoto seemed to protest, blooming a month early due to the warming weather. As a leading academic institution, Tel Aviv University is deeply committed to the global effort to curb this calamity. Our ingenious researchers, joining forces across faculties and disciplines, combine their knowledge and inventiveness in search of solutions for the enormous challenges. At the Porter School of Environment and Earth Studies, which resides in one of Israel's first original green buildings, research is rapidly expanding as mentors train the future generation of environmental experts. The Steinhardt Museum of Natural History labors rigorously to preserve both local and global biodiversity and reduce the extinction of species. And our atmospheric scientists study air pollution and track weather patterns with the most innovative tools, including satellite-borne technologies. At the same time, researchers throughout our campus work to mitigate the impact of climate change on poor populations already living under extreme conditions. Novel methods for supplying portable water and electricity to remote regions are developed at the Faculty of Engineering. And the Mana Center for Food Safety and Security develops innovative approaches to agriculture in order to feed humanity. With climate change high on our agenda, these are just few examples of the bustling activities on our campus. You will hear more about it over the next hour. Before I introduce our first guest, I would like to invite our governors who are watching this symposium on Zoom to start sending their questions to today's speakers through the chat function. We will do our best to answer some of these questions during the Q&A section at the end of the symposium. Our first guest today is Ms. Tamar Zandberg, Minister of Environmental Protection and Meretz Party member. Among her many responsibilities, she works tirelessly to expand Israel's climate strategy with the aim of joining the rest of the world in moving towards a cleaner and more efficient economy, which will assist in better preparing our world for harsh consequences of climate change, etc. Ms. Zandberg has various academic degrees, including a bachelor's degree in law from Tel Aviv University. Unfortunately, Ms. Zandberg could not be here with us today, but she has sent us the following message.
Professor Mike Steif, Rector of Tel Aviv University, Professor Colin Price, Head of the Environmental Studies Department at Porter School of Environment and Earth Science in Tel Aviv University, members of the Board of Trustees of Tel Aviv University, distinguished guests. I'm glad to take part at this event at Tel Aviv University entitled Between Climate Change, Space Research and Life Under Extreme Conditions. Albert Einstein once declared, "We shall require a substantially new manner of thinking if mankind is to survive." Although Einstein was not referring to climate change, today, as we face the reality of the climate crisis, we require a substantially new manner of thinking if we are to avoid a catastrophe. The inconvenient truth of climate change is that we will have to change, whether we like it or not. The only question is, do we avert a climate disaster before it is too late, out of choice, or do we adapt to climate disaster after it is too late, because we have no other choice? I'm happy to say that for the first time, the Israeli government is united across all its relevant ministries in its commitment not only to address the climate crisis, but to harness the potential of green transformation, of economic growth, social empowerment, and environmental diplomacy. We have therefore set ambitious targets for reducing emissions from waste, transportation, building, electricity, and industry. We developed a comprehensive adaptation plan and allocated billions of shekels to facilitate the green transition and support clean tech innovation. Many regions around the world are facing the increasingly acute threats of water scarcity, food insecurity, extreme weather, and desertification. Israel is well positioned to be a global leader in developing urgently needed solutions to these pressing challenges due to its knowledge gained and technologies developed over years of coping with desert conditions and limited resources. We recently found that there are close to 1,200 climate-related startups in Israel, and the number keeps rising. But effectively meeting the diverse challenges of climate change will require more than national policies. It will require unprecedented collaboration across sectors and regions. It will also require joint advanced research and studies. For both, the Israelis are reaching out and ready to join hands to work together. Innovation is driven by necessity and challenges. Space technologies can provide in tackling some of the major problems posed by climate change, and vice versa. In both, the role of scientists, research, and innovation is crucial. Israel can serve as an international natural laboratory for such studies. Its unique steep altitude and rainfall gradient result in high diversity of climate conditions in a very small distance, including some of the most extreme habitats in the world, such as the Dead Sea area and the Ramon crater. Moreover, the rate of climate change in Israel is faster than that of most of the world, allowing us to study the consequences and the efficiency of mitigation actions in diverse climate conditions at an early stage. To facilitate such studies, Tel Aviv University has joined with the Tamar Regional Council, the Dead Sea and Arava Science Center, and Porter Foundation, ECA Foundation, and the Ministry of Regional Cooperation to establish the new Porter Dead Sea Research Institute for Life Under Extreme Conditions. Understanding how life thrives now and in history result in new ideas and insights which can help humanity deal with both space and climate change challenges. I wish Tel Aviv University and the academia in general much success in your future work for the benefit of all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Zandberg. From Houston, Texas, we're very honored to have with us today NASA astronaut Dr. Jessica Meir as our guest speaker. Dr. Meir was selected to be a NASA astronaut in 2013. She holds a doctorate in marine biology from Scripps Institution of Oceanography from UCSD. Prior to becoming an astronaut, her career as a scientist focused on the physiology of animals in extreme environments. Dr. Meir most recently served as flight engineer on the International Space Station for expedition number 61 and 62. Dr. Meir, we know you have a special place for Israel in your heart. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please proceed. Via Zoom, of course.
Thank you very much. It is wonderful to be here with you today. I'm going to start out giving you a little bit of a video to show you some of the highlights of my mission, and then I'll show you a few slides about my journey with space research and life under extreme conditions and how that relates to the ever-pressing issue of climate change. So you can go ahead and roll the video. Here we are where the mission begins, and this is in Baikonur in Kazakhstan, since I launched on a Soyuz rocket and a Russian spacecraft and rocket. This is my crew, my commander, Oleg Skripochka, and also a historic component of this mission was that I flew with the very first astronaut from the United Arab Emirates, Hazza Ali Al-Mansouri. There's the blast off of our Soyuz rocket from Kazakhstan. The different stages of the rocket separating. And there's a picture for that Christina Cook, my colleague, took from the space station of our rocket leaving the atmosphere. Here's our view now as we're beginning to dock to the International Space Station.
Astronaut Jessica Meir making her first flight to the station.
As you can see, I was pretty ecstatic to be on the space station. My lifelong dream absolutely coming true.
It's going to be an amazing 6 months.
One of the best things about being in space is just the joy of floating 24 hours a day. It makes everything so much more fun. From preparing your food, usually we have mostly dehydrated foods, but I was lucky enough to make a charcuterie board from some cheese that was flown up for me in a visiting vehicle. And there's the normal kind of packet that we rehydrate with water. But again, so much more fun when you can play with your food and your water in this case. Microgravity makes everything so very special. Exercise is a huge part of our day up there on the space station. We spend 2.5 hours per day exercising because without that, we would have a significant loss of bone density and muscle mass. So we have the weightlifting machine, we have a cycle ergometer that you can see here, and the treadmill that you saw in the last view. Even daily activities are a lot more fun in space. We had some holidays, Halloween, and then also some anniversaries of the Apollo mission. Celebrating the various seasonal holidays as well. We were up there for Christmas and Hanukkah, of course. But of course, the most important part of our time on board the space station is doing science. We are doing scientific experiments ranging from physiology and medicine, combustion science, you can see right here, even flames burn differently in space, protein crystal growth, various types of cell biology, you name it, we're doing it up there. Here, we're loading the airlock in the Japanese module to launch some small satellites into orbit. There they go. We grew lettuce during my mission, and this will be important for sustainable food systems when we go back to the moon and go on toward missions like Mars, where we can't carry everything with us. We even got to eat some salad at the end of that, so that was a real treat. And this is the life sciences glove box, so doing different types of cell biology experiments, bone cells, muscle cells. Here's a physiology experiment where we're looking at the different fluid shifts associated with microgravity. And this is our -80 freezer, so this is how we freeze our samples, anything that needs to stay frozen throughout the mission. We did a lot of spacewalks during my mission, far more than usual. We did 9 spacewalks in a 4-month period, and usually you would only do maybe 1 or 2, sometimes even none in that period.
Jessica, Christina,
This will be some video of my first spacewalk, which also happened to be the first all-female spacewalk.
Hours when you get home. Have a great EVA.
Drew, thank you so much. Thank you, Drew. Thank you so much.
Luca Parmitano was flying the Canadarm, the robotic arm, and that's Christina on the end of the arm right now, with Luca flying from inside. We were out there to upgrade some of the batteries for the space station, basically to upgrade them to some new lithium-ion batteries for better power capacity on the space station. Doing a spacewalk is absolutely the most incredible part of the mission because you are out there in your own little mini self-contained spacecraft and you are looking through the void and blackness of space only through your visor at the Earth below. Pretty phenomenal. Unfortunately, most of the time we are very caught up in our task and completing the job at hand, but we still have to steal a few moments to look back at the Earth and enjoy the view. How do we get our supplies to the space station? We can't carry them with us on our own vehicle when we launch. There's not quite enough room. So we have other cargo vehicles to resupply the space station throughout these long duration missions. They bring cargo, they bring food, supplies, experiments, everything that we need to work and live up there. We use the Canadarm, the robotic arm, to grab these vehicles and pull them into the space station once they're close by. So we had several different types. We had a Japanese cargo vehicle. Here's some of the fruit that we were lucky enough to obtain in that cargo shipment. SpaceX Dragon also supplied cargo. Here's an example of that one there. And we also had the Northrop Grumman Cygnus. These vehicles are filled with trash when we're finished with them, and they burn up in the atmosphere, with the exception of the SpaceX Dragon, which does splash down so that we can send things back down to Earth that we need to get back home. One of the best things to do, though, of course, is to look out the window. And unfortunately, there's never enough time in a day to do this. I could spend days in there if I had enough time. But we do this not only for our own enjoyment, but also for science. We take a lot of photographs on the space station, which can be used by scientists on the ground to see things like our changing planet. Looking at things like the retreat of glaciers from the space station, that same vantage point which we've looked at for decades now, scientists can use those to actually make measurements and to understand what's going on with this ever-present battle with climate change. You probably recognize that view there. We just passed the coast of Israel on that shot, that time-lapse shot. Those are lightning pulses that you're seeing there among the city lights on a night pass. It's incredible to see the Earth glowing at night like this. There's the Nile River. You can see all of the civilization is really along that river, spilling out into Cairo, and that was Israel up to your right. These are squid fishing boats off Thailand, and here you have the aurora. So fascinating to see both the northern and the southern lights from the space station. It's like this otherworldly green glow. Unfortunately for me, my 205 days in space went far too quickly. I would have much rather stayed longer if I'd had the option, but it was time for us to depart, so we said goodbye to our crewmates and friends and got ready to undock from the space station. Departing from the space station is a very dynamic process. Once you start entering the atmosphere, you're literally burning up, but thankfully protected by your heat shield, and you can see this activity outside of your window. We touched down in the middle of nowhere in Kazakhstan, and within only a few minutes, the Russian search and rescue forces are there to extract us. This was a little bit different for us coming home since we came home in April of 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. I launched in September of 2019. There was no COVID-19 that we knew about, and we watched that all emerge from the vantage point of the space station. So pretty surreal for us to be witnessing that from up there. So with that, I'm going to transition into some slides and just give you a little bit more about my journey in space research and these life under extreme conditions. And you can see that that really has been a pervasive theme all throughout my life. This is a view from the International Space Station, and up here you can see the town that I grew up in, Caribou, Maine, in the US. You can see the familiar shape of Cape Cod up above that picture. But from the time that I was about 5 years old, even younger here, I was saying that I wanted to be an astronaut. So what I'm going to show you is how I'm experimenting in microgravity for me was really what I call a full circle for me as a scientist and then turned astronaut. My fascination, really my driving motivation in life, was a spirit of exploration and understanding the world around me, this scientific curiosity that made me really, really excited into science and understanding more about extreme environments and these extreme conditions that animals dwell in. My first foray into microgravity research was actually back in my undergraduate years at Brown University when we designed an experiment and got to fly on the Vomit Comet, which is the airplane that flies in a parabola shape. It gives you about 30 to 35 seconds of weightlessness. So that kind of first transition was from me going as a student scientist to then going on to working at NASA to now, once again, delve more into these life under extreme conditions. What happens to the human body under the most extreme condition of spaceflight? And this was for about 3 years. I was here at the NASA Johnson Space Center working to support human life science experiments on the International Space Station and also the Space Shuttle back then. During those years, I also had some incredible opportunities to live in an underwater habitat that you can see here in that upper left. And then I made that next transition. I had incredible experiences here at NASA, but I wanted to understand more. I had these driving questions that I had been thinking about for years, and I wanted to do my own science instead of just coordinating other people's science. So I decided to go back to school and I started to study the diving physiology of animals, particularly deep diving birds and mammals, animals like emperor penguins. They can hold their breath for 30 minutes, elephant seals, 120 minutes on a single breath. So trying to understand, again, how does life survive under very, very extreme conditions? I spent time in the Antarctic doing that work. Also had the privilege of diving down there myself, and also worked with elephant seals in California. Same kind of thing, trying to understand how animals like these incredible deep divers can do the things that they do. I then went to another extreme condition in an animal that thrived there, and this is the iconic bar-headed goose. It's the species of goose that migrates over the tallest mountains on the planet, the Himalaya, twice a year. So again, this curiosity of trying to understand how can this animal do that. In order to conduct this work, we actually imprinted animals on me. So I was with them from the time that they hatched. They thought that I was their mother, and thus we were able to train them to successfully fly in a wind tunnel to understand, again, more about their physiology. In this video, this bird is flying at half the amount of oxygen that we have at sea level, so 10.5% oxygen, and we even were able to successfully fly them in the tunnel at 7%, only a third of that. So then what I kind of say as wrapping up this circle, making this circle complete, is moving now in that last phase from being a scientist, doing these kind of experiments on animals, to then my dream coming true of becoming an astronaut and completing my mission on the International Space Station, where now I'm the animal in the extreme environment, and I'm the one that will be poked and prodded in the name of science. And for me, I think that's kind of just like paying my dues in order to pay back for all that I had reaped in my previous career. So as you can see, we are very heavily instrumented with physiological studies and medical equipment during many of these experiments. And to look back at that trajectory, here I was back in 2003 training Spanish astronaut Pedro Duque how to use the ultrasound. And then 17 years later, I was up there using the ultrasound myself to do some physiological experiments. Of course, I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the very, very important issue and the theme of this conference today, transitioning from that life under these extreme conditions and what that teaches us, what benefits that can bring us back down on Earth, to looking at what we're doing directly at NASA to help monitor our changing planet. The first thing that we need to do in order to make sure that we protect our planet and preserve it for the generations to come is to make sure that we have the data. We need to understand the problems, we need to measure them. And that's something that we take very seriously here at NASA. There are a whole suite of instruments that we use, not necessarily on the International Space Station, but on all kinds of different satellites and remote sensing platforms at NASA. Today, I'm just going to show you a few examples of what we have on the International Space Station, since that, of course, was my home. And these kind of things get talked about a little bit less than the stuff that we're participating in as astronauts, of course, because most of these instruments are mounted on the outside of the space station. We don't actually interact with them on our daily basis, but they're doing very, very important things, looking back at our home planet and monitoring these changing systems. And just a few examples of this, you have the Cloud Aerosol Transport System, and this was launched in January of 2015, and it is providing measurements of the atmospheric aerosols and clouds from the space station. So really important to understanding what's going on in our atmosphere with our changing climate. We have the Columbus Automatic Identification System. This is something that tracks ships across the seas. So this is helping us look at maritime traffic and also the impact that it's having on our waterways. We have the Rapid Scat, and this is a scatterometer. So again, it is looking at it is a way that we can measure the winds on the ocean surface. So we have instruments that are looking at sea surface temperature, chlorophyll levels, all these different parameters of our oceans, looking at different use for agriculture purposes, a whole suite of instruments on the International Space Station that can help us tackle these very important problems with climate change. Another thing that the International Space Station offers is being a very unique vantage point for Earth observations. And I mentioned this very briefly in the video, but of course we spend a lot of time looking out the window for our own pleasure, but we also take a lot of photos, again, to help scientists on the ground. We have an experiment called the Crew Earth Observations, where we have different target opportunities so that we can help provide these data. And just one example here, one of my favorite places to pass over from the space station are the Patagonia ice fields. So you can clearly see these glacial tongues. And we've been passing over these since the beginning of the space station. So for over 20 years now, we have a data set from the same vantage point, from the same perspective, and these types of photographs, which scientists can help use to monitor the retreat of these glaciers and how things are changing on our planet. I just wanted to wrap up here with a few more views so that you can help get a little bit of a perspective of what it looks like to look out through one of these windows. And this is a time lapse that I put together passing over Africa, and you'll see the familiar coastline of Israel coming up here, so pay attention. As you can see, the textures and the color palette that we are so privileged to see from the space station are really outstanding. I had no idea how varied even just the different textures of sands and sand dunes could be from space. Here we come over the Middle East, and there's Israel. These views never get old. I could have spent days on end there in the cupola. Another few images of your home there in Israel, so shalom to everybody. And I also wanted, of course, to dedicate this talk and our time today to the crew of the Space Shuttle Columbia. And of course, Ilan Ramon, the very first Israeli in space, was part of this mission. And unfortunately, this crew did tragically lose their lives upon returning home, but did accomplish some incredible scientific objectives during their mission. I flew a few items in honor of Ilan Ramon and the Columbia crew. You can see this coin floating in the cupola alongside me, which has his photograph, his picture, and then also the Columbia Space Shuttle. And I also flew this phoenix, a drawing that Rona Ramon, Ilan's wife, actually did. And I had this with me as well to capture that spirit of the phoenix always rising from the ashes. Also flew an Israeli flag with me, of course, since I think all of you know Israel is a very important part of me as well. My father and all of his relatives, almost all of his relatives are still all in Israel. So hello again to everybody there, and thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Dr. Meir, for a fascinating presentation. I'm sure our governors have many questions to ask you. I would like to take this opportunity to remind our viewers at home to send their questions using the chat function on Zoom. We will try to answer some of these questions after the next part of the symposium. And I would like to invite our moderator, Professor Colin Price, Head of the Environmental Studies Department, Porter School of Environment and Earth Sciences, and also the head of the new University Climate Action Initiative, as well as the Frankel Initiative on Combating Pollution. He was also involved in the launch of the first satellite of Tel Aviv University this year, TauSat-1. Professor Price is a world-renowned atmospheric physicist. He specializes in the Earth's weather and climate with a focus on thunderstorms, climate change, and natural disasters. Professor Price completed his PhD while working at NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies in New York. After completing a postdoctoral fellowship at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in California, he returned to Tel Aviv University in 1995. Professor Price, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark, and good afternoon to everyone here. Good morning, good evening for those around the world. We're living in very exciting times. Things are changing rapidly. And this symposium is basically focusing on two revolutions which are occurring as we're sitting here today. The first revolution is in civilian space, the space industry, a field that we now call new space, as opposed to the old space. If you would have looked 10 years ago at the space industry, the major players were the national space agencies, NASA, the European Space Agency, Japanese Space Agency, and major companies like Boeing, Lockheed Martin. But today, we're seeing private industries entering the space arena. You've all heard of SpaceX, Elon Musk, Virgin Space, Blue Origin, and others all leading the way. Just yesterday, William Shatner from Star Trek actually became the latest private astronaut going into space. And he did that at the age of 90. This actually, after Jessica's presentation, gives me a lot of hope, because this is one of my dreams, to get into space, so I still have some time. And next February, as we heard, after Ilan Ramon, which we worked with in 2000 at Tel Aviv University, the scientific experiment was part of our group. Next year, Eitan Steva, the second Israeli astronaut, will be going into space, but on a private flight to the International Space Station. So there's a revolution occurring in the space industry, and not only with going up, sending astronauts into space, but also when we're talking about satellites and research in space. And due to the miniaturization and standardization of sensors, of equipment, universities and even high schools here in Israel are sending satellites to space. The second revolution that's happening, as we're sitting here today, is an energy revolution. Since the Industrial Revolution, we have relied on polluting fossil fuels to drive our economies. But today, renewable energies are in some cases even cheaper than the fossil fuels. And in the coming decade, we're going to see a major revolution in the energy sector, moving away from fossil fuels and going more to renewables. And Tel Aviv University is part of both of these revolutions. And this year, 2021, was a pivotal year for the university. In January, we heard from the rector, we launched our first satellite, TauSat-1. This satellite is what we call a CubeSat, or a nanosatellite. It's the size of a shoebox. It's a small satellite of maybe 3-4 kilograms, built by our students from the engineering faculty and from exact sciences, with the help of the Porter Foundation. And the satellite's working well. We launched it. Everything's working. We get daily downlinks of data, and we're using this for our research. And at the moment, we're also planning the future satellites, and one will also be related to the climate and the environment. The second major event that occurred this year related to these two revolutions was the launch of the new Climate Action Initiative at Tel Aviv University, with a focus on looking at innovative solutions for climate change. I've been working on the climate science for 30 years now, and I can go on for another 30 years, but we'll just figure out how much worse it's going to get for all of us. So it's time to actually make a switch, the scientists too, and start to look for solutions to the problem. And this also involves our Dead Sea Research Center, which is looking at extreme environments and how we can actually adapt to extreme environments in the future. And in 2 weeks' time, you'll be hearing in the news a lot about the COP26 conference in Glasgow, Scotland. World leaders, including Mr. Bennett and Biden, everyone's coming to Glasgow to try to deal with this crisis, to solve these problems. How are we going to reduce greenhouse gases? How are we going to move away from fossil fuels and move into a new era which will be using clean energy In the future, there are many challenges, but also many opportunities here to help our world become a more sustainable planet and have a cleaner, more just world for our children and grandchildren. So today's symposium basically combines these two new directions at Tel Aviv University: space, satellites, Earth observations from space, together with sustainability, environment, and climate change. And so for all of you here and watching overseas, we've brought two of our rising stars at Tel Aviv University to speak to you today. Our first presentation will be from Dr. Ram Fishman from the School of Social and Policy Studies. Ram is an expert in sustainable development with a PhD in sustainable development from Columbia University in New York. His research is focused on the developing world that is actually suffering the most from the global climate crisis. Ram, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. This famous photo was taken in 1968. It's the photo of the Earthrise taken from space, and it absolutely revolutionized the way we perceive the Earth environment. It made us appreciate its fragility. And Jessica showed us before how the ability to see Earth from space is also making great strides in our understanding of the physical dynamics of climate change. I would like to share some thoughts about how our ability to see Earth from space is also making us more aware of the deprivation that populations around the world are experiencing, deprivations that and people that are otherwise almost invisible to us. So, for example, if you look at this composite image of nightlight images taken from space, we see, first of all of these lights and the extent of human activity. This activity is also an economic activity. It's responsible for a lot of our greenhouse gas emissions. But we also see, if you notice, the darkness in Africa, a continent where billions of people live, and yet there's hardly any light that we can see in. And so it's really, ironically, not so much by seeing, but by not seeing the light in Africa and other low-income parts of the world, that we are beginning to appreciate the deprivations that these people are facing. Being able to see Earth from space is also making us understand how fragile the livelihoods of hundreds of millions of smallholder farmers are, people who are these are the poorest people on the planet, and every tiny green dot on this map means the livelihood of a family somewhere in Africa or in other parts of the world. So these indices of greenness, called NDVI indices, are providing us with powerful new data to understand how the livelihoods of these people is affected by climatic variability and other factors. Again, tiny farms and villages that otherwise would be almost invisible to us. It's helping us see how climate variability, droughts, heat waves, are destroying the livelihoods of these people, and eventually research has shown that it's also driving migration like we're seeing in the last years. The flip side of that data on fires, for example, is also detectable from space, is showing us how the poor are forced to engage in environmentally destructive activities, like setting fires to fields, or cutting down forests. These are obviously activities which are exacerbating and contributing to climate change. And so, and even, we're even able to see through space with this amazing mission, the GRACE mission that NASA launched, how water resources around the world are becoming depleted. These satellites can measure tiny variations in the gravitational field of the Earth, and they show us that they are resulting from the loss of water. So they're showing us our unsustainable farming practices are actually depleting precious water resources. And all of this data on nightlights, greenness, And all of the things we've seen are actually providing us with treasures of data that are enabling this emerging science of sustainable development to become an empirical, data-based science. What is this science about? It's about trying to figure out models that can improve the prosperity of populations, especially in the developing world, achieve economic development, but not by following the model, the path that we have taken to our own prosperity. Because if these populations in developing countries follow the same path, the environmental destruction that would result in would be unmanageable. It would be the end of any hope of stabilizing the climate. So, and this is where also, like, responding to this challenge, finding new models of green growth, finding ways to improve livelihoods and prosperity, but without the environmental distraction that usually accompanies it, that is the goal of the discipline of sustainable development. And it forces us to come down from space and down to the ground level. Because what we need to do is to find new models that combine technology and economics, good economics, business models, that can enable the poor to work with us, working with the poor, find ways for them to achieve their prosperity in a sustainable way. Not just out of philanthropy, but because if we don't do that, then they are going to follow our own path to prosperity, and in the course of doing it, we will lose all hope of stopping climate change. So this is the partnership we need, and it's, you know, here in Israel, we have to appreciate that many of these populations in developing countries are looking to Israel as a model, as a source of innovation, as a model of a country that has flourished in difficult environmental conditions. And as a country, Israel is not sufficiently responsive to these demands. But we in the university, we're trying to do our bit. We have a small program called the Nitzan Lab, which works with Israeli companies, innovations, and partners in Africa and Asia to take these solutions to the field and test them, working with our students. So here you see some examples of some of this work, figuring out how to make solar irrigation, empower agriculture without burning any diesel fuels. In Nepal, in this case, here is one of our students in Kenya looking into how a technology that produces energy, biogas, from waste rather than from fuel, is helping to energize these rural populations, how soil moisture can be conserved. By the way, that company is called Home Biogas, and here students are working in India to figure out how a technology by the Israeli company Talia can help farmers maintain soil moisture during droughts with a reusable mulch. Precision agriculture, a picture from Kenya where our students are trying to implement an Israeli model of pest monitoring to try and reduce the amount of pesticide that is used to deal with pests. This is a good place to show a little clip about a master program that my former dean, Professor Tami Ronen, has started to actually centered around this idea, where we get Israeli students with students, international students from Africa and India, to work on these things together. So if you could kindly show the clip. Achieving sustainable development is the most difficult and most important challenge of our generation.
We believe that in order to achieve change, we need to train leaders.
Train people who will make real contributions to overcoming this challenge. And that starts from day one in the program.
Our projects and thesis combine both engineering and social sciences in order to solve the most complex issues that humanity needs to face.
As an engineer, I was always taught to think of the best technological solution for a problem. So my biggest benefit from the program is realizing that the human and social factors always take part.
The project attempts to bridge the Israeli ecosystem and innovation to these places that need these solutions the most.
We take the students to work with us on real projects that we run with top international partners.
My time in India was an amazing opportunity to leave the classroom and to see the practical realities of sustainable development in the field.
I like that I can begin a project and end a project, and that I'm actually creating action towards development.
I'm enjoying the opportunity to meet the top professionals in the field in Israel, to learn from some of the best.
This is very exciting because we really have the ability to see how we can take things we've learned about, conducted research, and see the way it can come into life.
If you have a heart which is passionate about sustainable development, a mind which likes analytical thinking, and a character to work hard, to take initiative and leadership of real projects, then this is the right program for you. Thank you. I'd like to just close with one personal word about our responsibility as scientists in the face of climate change. The science is very clear. We need to end the era of fossil fuels and put an immediate end to the use of fossil fuels. And as scientists, as universities, I think we have an obligation to take a stand for science and for social responsibility and to move societies in this direction. We are fortunate that the leadership of this university and our president is very attentive to this agenda. Many academic institutions around the world are taking action to stop making investments in the fossil fuel industry and to reduce the emissions on campus. And I just want to express our support to the leadership in helping move Tel Aviv University to be one of the leaders in Israel in this regard. I know that the President has formed the Green Council, and I hope to see more action really helping us to take the lead in Israel in this regard. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Ram. Our second rising star is Dr. Vered Blas from the School of Environment and Earth Sciences here in the Porter Building. Vered received a PhD in Environmental Science and Management from the University of California in Santa Barbara. Vered is an expert in the field of industrial ecology. This involves quantifying the environmental impact of industrial goods and services with the ultimate goal of conserving and reusing resources. Vered?
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to first start by thanking the organizing for inviting me to speak today. It's an honor. And I actually want to say that I'm very happy that the sustainability topics and climate crisis is actually on the agenda of many institutions across board, management, boards. And it wasn't the situation in Israel just 10 years ago. So this is a very important thing. I'm also here to remind us that the climate crisis is super important, but sustainability is a very big topic. Okay, we can think about it as social responsibility and impact investing. We think about it in terms of waste management, resource efficiency, green growth that the minister just mentioned. We can talk about air and water pollution, endangered and invasive species. So it's a very diverse world, and we really need to make sure that we actually address all of those aspects of sustainability and not only the climate crisis. Regardless of the topic that we choose to focus on in sustainability, one of the most important parts is to be able to quantify it and to be transparent. So when you want to measure actually the impact of what you're doing, to make sure that you are going in the right direction. So the type of questions that I ask when I think about sustainability and innovation include what is the meaning of sustainable product or a sustainable company or a sustainable university or campus? Or what is the meaning of sustainability when I have a new idea? Can I already think about this complex pile of things when I talk about new technologies? I don't even know how it will look like. I just have a great idea to save the world, right? For example, as we saw in Ram's work. And there are many different methods to do it. You know, we are good in 3 letters, right? We like the 3 letters. So ESGs and SDGs and GRI and TRI and LCA, all of those are terms of established matrices that were developed by different organizations, by academia, to measure at different levels sustainability, country level, company level, product level. Okay? But they are very clear because the technology is already there. We know exactly what we are trying to measure. But what happens when we have new ideas and we don't know exactly how they will look like? Can we actually forecast what will be the impact of sustainability? So in my field of industrial ecology, the way we look at sustainability and think about it is in a very holistic, wide way. We think in life cycle perspective, from the R&D to raw materials, to production, to use phase, to end of life, across the social, environmental, and economic aspects for the different agents and players that are in this complex system. And of course, thinking about global issues like the climate crisis, but also local issues. And Israel is actually in a very unique situation with some of our climatic issues, with some of our water issues, and the ecological system that are very specific here. And we must remember that climate change is not the only thing that is important. It's very important, but we have other very critical things to think about when we talk about sustainability. So here is a recent study that we published on water systems, trying to understand the role of desalination. As you know, Israel is a leader in desalination technology. Now it's a mature technology. It wasn't the case a while ago. And we actually try to assess the environmental impacts widely of the water system in Israel. So what does it mean to consume 1 cubic of water from the tap? Okay, what are the environmental impacts? We were able to quantify it and look at comparison for other countries. So we can see that Israel is actually a bit above the middle, right? So we're talking about 2.4 kilo CO2 for every cubic meters. There are countries that are doing it much better, okay, very close to the 0, but there are also countries that are above us. And when we look at the details, we can actually play with the role of the desalination rate. So for example, in 2015, we have 36% of our water in the tap water came from the desalination. Okay? But we can also look what will be the case when we have 100% desalination, how those numbers will look like, or how it will look like when our grid will stay quite dirty from carbon perspective, or if we move to 100% renewables. And we can measure the effect of those changes on the total environmental impact of the water system. And besides climate change, which is important, and here we found that 89% of the carbon emitted was due to the electricity, because desalination is very intensive on energy use. There are also important things to consider, like leakages. Okay? Also, that the water system is about 4% of the total country GHG emissions. That's not a small number, so we better, look at it in more details. And other aspects. For example, a glass of 250 ml of water actually generates 270 grams of waste for every 1 cup of water. Okay, so it's not just about climate. It's other important aspects that we must consider. So next time when you drink a cup of water, think about it. But what do we do when we don't have yet established technologies? We have new ideas. We want to save the world. We want to change the climate crisis and stop it and start seeing a way of doing things differently. So the existing tools are quite good for existing technologies. If you want to assess the impact of a bread or carrot or a car, it's great. But when it's just an idea, we don't have good methodologies yet. Okay? And this is how we think about it. We assess new products and technologies by first looking at the life cycle of the new technology or the new idea, trying to understand how it will look like. Where can it be applied and save the world? if it's all the water bodies that are polluted, or if the entire industry that can start using new recycled materials instead of virgin material. And when we have data gaps, we must use methods of AI in order to complement the data. So just, I want to finish by giving you two examples that you might can connect to. One is in water system. I have a new water treatment technology that I think that is very good for the environment. I can assess the technology itself. I can look worldwide where this can technology be used and understand what will be the impact, the positive impact, net positive impact if I apply it. We recently won a grant for such a study with Professor Adas Maman from engineering. We can also do the same with recycling processes. Collecting textiles in Israel, producing nanocellulose from the recycled materials. The process itself has environmental impact that we must assess. Collecting in all the bins, bringing it to central facility, sort it, shred it, whatever we need to do in order to recycle it. And who will use the recycled nanocellulose? Is there anyone in the industry in Israel that can actually use it? Because if not, we didn't achieve anything. We want to save virgin material. We want someone to use that recycled material to keep the materials in the local economy and to contribute to what we call local circular economy. So those are just two examples to open your mind, and thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Vered. Thank you both, Vered and Ram, as well as Jessica. Now it's time for some questions, if there are questions. I see there's one from Australia. David, maybe you can ask your question. David?
Hello, sorry, just a slight delay. Jessica, thank you so much for your presentation. Your images were amazing, and I think we're all very envious of you. My question is, during the 205 days that you spent, you were obviously able to make some incredible observations as to what was happening on the planet. What are your conclusions in terms of the extent of climate change based on what you saw while you were in space?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, I don't think that what I was looking at with my own eyes, I can necessarily say that is robust enough to be a real scientific measurement. But the example I provided, for example, those retreating glaciers, is something that the scientists can use. But I think the important part about our view and the impact that we observe from space is really just how astounding it is, that privilege of looking back at the planet with your own eyes and how that makes you feel and appreciate our planet. So many people before me have said this, and for me, I've been an avid environmentalist well before I got to space, and I assumed that it would resonate even more loudly, and it really did. Looking back at the planet with this very thin, tenuous band of an atmosphere, you cannot avoid seeing how fragile it is, how special it is, and how we need to protect it, especially among this void and blackness of space, how remarkably beautiful and stunning it is, and how special it is. And so when you see that thin atmosphere, you see how interconnected all of the land masses are and all of the oceans. You realize how fragile it is, you realize that we need to protect it, and most importantly, you realize that we are all in this together. When you see all of those interconnected masses, we are truly one. You don't see those borders from space, all of the ones that we've imposed upon ourselves. We are one human and one people, and we have to do what we can and work together in order to truly preserve our planet for the future. That's really the only way that it will work, is if everybody does their part and if we do so together.
Great, thank you. I think we have one or two questions from the audience. Do we have a microphone up there? Okay, yes. Yeah.
I have a question for whoever wants to answer it, and that is, during the COVID period, how did you see the lockdowns and all the limitations globally affect the environment, and what can we learn? What can we learn from this amazing experiment that we've all been going through? And what were you able, sorry, Jessica, from space, did you see any changes through COVID? Thank you.
Vered? No, it's a button there. עכשיו זה עובד, עכשיו זה עובד.
עכשיו זה עובד, מצוין. אז, so we actually did, I think this is a fascinating time, and it's a very important question. We actually did some very urgent research in that regard, asking people, you know, did you change any of your behavior? How do you think about the environment, and what do you plan to do? Did you learn something from that? And we saw very interesting results of, yes, we actually make us think better and stronger on the environmental and the connections between the pandemic and maybe other environmental issues, and also the thinking that they will change the behavior. They will recycle more, they will be less consuming, they will drive less, but now we need to see the evidence in practice. And we all know that actually in some cases, there was the rebound effect. You know, we've been in lockdowns. When we went out, we went crazy with driving, crazy with, you know, the traffic, crazy with buying. And so the evidence for actually having something happen is very little at the moment. We need to actually measure what's going to change in the behavior. But I think that at the government's level, there is some governments are smart enough and fast enough to decide on how they're going to exit from the pandemic, challenging and channeling some resources for the green growth way. And we see it in Europe, and I'm very hoping that we will see that in Israel. But this is a good timing to do something that is major on that.
Ram, you want to say something?
Yeah, just to say, I think what COVID taught us is what is not the right way to deal with climate change. There was, and the economic slowdown caused by COVID really resulted in a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, but it was small and temporary in terms of emissions while causing a great deal of pain to people all over the world. There is this wide-held perception that dealing with climate change will require us to use less electricity to change our lifestyles, kind of like maybe what we did during the COVID crisis. It's a very important misconception. There is a way of dealing with climate change which will not require us to use less power or to change our ways of life. Technologies are there to provide alternative sources of energy to be able to sustain the modern lifestyle. It's only a matter of political will by governments to make the necessary investment in transitioning to these other sources. So it's just a misconception that I think is important to clarify.
Thank you, Ram. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I'm getting pushed on the side here that we have to stop. There are plenty of other questions I see, but unfortunately, we do have to stop. You can speak to the speakers during the break. So on behalf of the Rector, I'd like to thank all of our speakers in the symposium, Jessica, Ram, Vered, for their great presentations and for sharing their knowledge and their research with us. As a closing comment, I'd also like to say that we're now working on the next satellite for Tel Aviv University based on climate and environment, together with the Canadian Friends of Tel Aviv University. And all of you are welcome to be part of this exciting project. Any of you want to be part of it, you can contact me directly. We invite you to refreshments outside afterwards. So thank you all, and a good evening to all.